In the material on self-esteem, Lazaris has one of the building blocks or the maintenance blocks of self-esteem as the determination to be powerful. In other material, there's a focus on a willingness to be wrong on the search of what's right, in the search for what's right, a willingness to be wrong in the search for what's right. And those two come together, meaning if you're not willing to be wrong in the search for something better, if you're not willing to make a mistake in the path of learning, you have no power. And I wanted to set up a little bit of, the geometry of this. Why is it vital, essential, to be willing to be wrong in the search of what's right? And to do that, we begin with the sphere, the unbroken whole. We'll move it a little bit over here. We begin with the one, right? Everything, all myths, all creation, all life begins with one, right? In the fractal representation of the birth of the universe, a big bang, right? Step down to the moment of conception, right? The point when two give birth to one single cell before it divides, right? So you have the one, you have the unbroken whole, right? Before the fall, before the descent into the knowledge of duality, metaphorically expressed as the knowledge of good and evil, or the step out of the garden. The garden is the ecological whole. It all begins with one, but there's no consciousness, right, in one. You ask, before you divide something into language, you have no consciousness. However, when you do divide things into language, it's always wrong. So you have this kind of parallel where, this is why it's so irritating when you're trying to understand and see someone and you say, what are you thinking? Nothing. Okay. There's no division there. You're not thinking really nothing, right? But you're not letting me into your division. What are you thinking? Or what are you feeling? I'm feeling everything. Everything. I'm feeling everything. What exactly? Wonder, joy, yes, that, and this, and this. To get a sense, to locate where an ego or an individual is, you have to cut and divide the whole. You have to use contrast. You have to use the pattern recognizing brain, the rational brain, to take this whole, right? You have just this image, this whole, but then you divide it. You say that's purple, that's green, that's dark green, that's light green. This is a white circle, right? But of course, it's all wrong, right? There's more than 256 million colors. That's just the point at which computers usually give up trying to name the colors, right? Because you can take the one and you can divide it into an infinite number of distinctions. It's called language, that creates the illusion of consciousness. Right? Every single thought that we think is structured in language, which results in the phenomena, the fact that we cannot think a single thought without the words that hold the space for the awareness of that thought. You delete the words in a thought, the thought disappears. as it disappears, we become unconscious unless we replace it with another thought that is also structured, brought into focus through language. Now, we can think of language, and there have been more than 10,000 languages in human history, as a system of division, right? So we take the one and we break it into a grid. And each of the units within that grid is a word, right? So we take the one, the hand, and we break it into a grid, and we say this is a thumb, this is an index finger, right? So we take the one, we divide it into words. Now, the first illusion here is this is not a thumb, right? Thumb is a sound that is, a reference point. Thumb. There's nothing to do with this, other than that I'm correlating them. I'm creating a connection between a sound and this. This is not making the sound thumb. I am, right? And we've been brainwashed, conditioned to associate those that speak English, the sound thumb, with this, even though it has nothing to do with one another, right? So that's the first illusion in language. The sounds are not the things they reference. Now, the other thing that we do as a shortcut is we create pictures based on the sound, based on memory, that are also not this particular thumb. So that's the second thing, right? We create a sound, thumb, that triggers an image that is also not a thumb. And then the image supposedly connects to the thumb, right? Now, the next illusion is like we'll refer to a thumb within our paradigm, right? We'll say a thumb is the small part on the hand, right? There's two of them, and it's the smallest one, and it's an outline here, right? So we create a model within our framework of language of a thumb, right? And what we reference, because if you draw a black and white outline of a hand, we'll recognize and we'll point to that's the thumb. Of course, it isn't the thumb, right? That's a drawing of a thumb, a symbolic representation of an image that isn't a thumb either, that's triggered by a sound that also isn't a thumb. And then the thumb is so much more and so much less than the definition in a dictionary. That's also, it's a tiny little slice of words that bring into focus certain other illusions about the thumb, right? The thumb is the thing like this. Now, the next level of illusion, of course, is that because we cut the world into words, right? You have these illusionary grid lines. They're not real, right? So the word thumb, what it does is it slices, like where is the line exactly? Is that a thumb? What about that? Like, because the muscles from here are going back here. So is that a thumb? Right? If the thumb is the thing that articulates, right? Okay, so that seems to be moving too. Look, did you see that? Look at that. So is that a thumb? No, we say, no, that's a palm. This is the thumb, right? But you realize it's not real, right? Now, there's a couple reasons that the distinction is not real, right? The thumb is that which is here and articulates. Now, what if you took the heart out? Could you still have a thumb, right? No blood, no, you can't get a thumb, can you, right? Because this can't move without my heart. It also can't move without my brain. And this bit can't move without this bit. And this bit is held by this bit. And this bit is held by this bit, which is held by this bit, which is held by this bit, which is held by that bit. And so it goes. There's no separation. But language imposes a structure, right? An abstract idea that isn't real. Because the idea, in its abstract isolation from other ideas, is unfounded. It's impractical, right? You cannot get a single movement of a single thumb without the body that supports it. So in other words, it's all wrong. Thumb is wrong. It's not a thumb, right? Thumb triggers the image of the thumb. That's not a thumb. That's all wrong. The image can be taken into abstraction that's also not a thumb, right? The dictionary that says thumb isn't a thumb. And then the thumb isn't a thumb without everything else. Now, if something is in an interdependent relationship, meaning if this cannot exist without other things existing, how can it be separate from that which it depends on? It can't be, right? So, right, so the whole thing is illusion, right? And then you say, well, the thumb is, or the thumb is, purple and pink and all that, you say, right? Well, then you change the lens in your eyes. Suddenly the color changes. So is it this color, or have we all just agreed to observe and measure it in a way that produces this color, right? So that's, doesn't hold up. And then you start looking at the thumb at different scales, right? You start going subatomic. Well, suddenly it's not a moving thing. It's billions upon billions of vibrating subatomic particles and atoms, etc. We could say it's energy. But what does that mean, right? Because energy triggers other pictures, like how do I harness it? Like if it's energy, how do I put it in my car, or charge my phone with it, or, because, so the whole matrix of human consciousness is a nested layer of illusions resting on the shaky foundation of language that creates an illusionary partition between one thing and the other things that they are inextricably connected to. So words create the illusion of partition between an infinite number of things that are part of the unbroken whole, that are part of the one that has never disappeared, right? We've descended into a language or linguistic delusion in which the one is a series of compartmentalized bits. We've descended into that illusion or delusion, and then out of that, in that state of illusion or delusion, we're trying to make sense of what is. Right? Is this way or is it that way? And of course, most of the time, it's both. And a lot more, right? Because language is also a very dumbed down version. Like we say, you look at the definition of a thumb, the articulating small, smallest appendage, that's on that's on both hands, right? And there will be a definition for hand, with typically five, appendages that can move around that are connected to the wrist. And then there'll be a definition of wrist. But those definitions are less than 1% of what 1% of what they are, right? The definition of thumb doesn't depend on heat, but that's a fallacy in the dictionary, because if there was no heat in this body, it couldn't move. It would set up in what's, rigor mortis, it wouldn't be able to move without heat. So if this can't exist without heat, but its definition doesn't include an operating temperature, it's an incomplete definition. Well, that's just in one little dimension that we have the ability to grasp, right? So what about all the other dimensions? We have, a couple of measuring devices, some eyes, some ears, some smell. We have, basically 5 measuring devices. Now, anyone knows who has a lot of equipment for measuring, tape measures, spectrometers, light meters, heat readers, right? That the more measuring devices you direct at something, the more dimensional it becomes, right? And then you also know that the more you adjust the magnification of each measuring device, right? At this level, the thumb seems to be silent, right? But if you start listening to the sound of the subatomic particles, if you can tune into that, right? If you measure movement in a way that produces sound, or energy in a way that produces sound, well, then suddenly this becomes a singing thumb with trillions upon trillions of subatomic particles that are all singing. You take away the speaker, the sound, the observing and measure device, and then they're not singing. You take away the eyes and they stop dancing. You turn on eyes in some form and use, microscopes at a certain level and keep looking in, and suddenly you have a dancing symphony. You zoom in and it's the entire universe. You zoom out and it's a tiny speck. So which is it? Right? And those are just what we can imagine. What about all the observing and measuring devices that can observe and see all of the dimensions that we don't know that we don't know? That are always, the unknown is always 99.9% bigger than the known. Right? There isn't a single arena in life where most of it isn't in the unknown unknown. You say, oh, I know myself. No, you don't. Right? 99.999% of who you are exists in the unknown unknown. You don't know it, and you don't know that you don't know it. Right? And then, a slight step down from that is all the stuff that hopefully you know that you don't know. Right? You don't know how your atoms in your body have moved throughout the universe. But if you are using atoms that were once another star, is that not a part of you within at least the paradigm of time and space? So if you do not know your history, can you fully know your present? And if you do not know your future, can you fully know your present? And what about the probability field and the possibility field? If you do not know your probability field, can you really understand where you are within it? If you do not know your possibility field, can you understand where you are within the possibility field? And given that the possibility field is 99.999% bigger than the actual field, right? And given the fact that most of us don't begin to understand the actual, or we understand a few percent. So we understand a few percent of a few percent of a few percent on a few dimensions through the lens of a nested hierarchy of illusions resting on symbols that in many cases we reference more than our felt experience. Like in many cases, we live so much in the symbol, in the illusion, that we think the thought, we have the memory, we hear the sound of the words, we see a projected picture, and it doesn't have anything to do with the felt experience of the present. Now, within that framework, right, we expect, we ask ourselves to be right. I want to be right. I want to do the right thing. I want to think the right thing. Okay, good luck. Right? Your words are all based on the illusion of partition, right? And there's a nested hierarchy, right? The illusion of, this word is based on other words that provide frameworks, paradigms. Materialism, for example, right? Where we focus on the sensations and definition of this. Right? So this whole conversation about the thumb is within a materialistic scientific paradigm. But if we change the paradigm to an intuitive or what? A sensational thing or present thing that's wordless, right? If we change the paradigm, we immediately start measuring things in a different way, producing different results. So let's imagine, right, that this is why it's so crippling to need to be right, right? This is why I think it's essential to be willing to be wrong in the search for what's right. This grid is too crude, right? Language is too crude an architecture to understand the subtleties in the dance of subatomic particles. Now we can see that, right, when we try to penetrate the activity of a single thumb with language. Why? Well, let's imagine that you start looking at this through the lens that allows you to see subatomic particles. So you zoom in and you zoom in and you zoom in. Well, the lens that, you can only keep track of maybe 5 or 10 subatomic particles at the moment. They're all spinning very, very fast. And before you can think that's one spun to the left, it's already spun back and forth perhaps 1 million times. In other words, your mind cannot catch up to the speed of a single electron. Meaning, if you dedicated your entire life through the illusion of language, right? Because we're pretending that it's one electron, of course, that has nothing to do with all the other ones, right? We zoom in and we zoom in. We just look at a single electron. Well, in order to be conscious of it, we'd have to say it's moving to the right now it's moving to the left, it's 1 millimeter, it's 1/10 of a millimeter at X magnification, it's moving this and that. To be conscious of it, not the words that symbolize it, we'd have to keep up with the movement, but we can't. The electron is faster than we can think. So we can't be conscious, because to be conscious is to put something into words in the moment, right? Someone touches us and we can say, this person is rubbing my shoulder, right? Because they're moving their hand at a rate of, 4 centimeters a second, let's say. So we can grasp that. It's pretty crude. It's within our ability to make a symbol up so that we become aware of it before it disappears. We can't do that with a single electron. So we can say very abstractly that the electron is moving very fast. It's meaningless. Just symbols upon symbols upon symbols that are out of phase with a single electron. We can't keep up. We can't say left, right, left, right, left, right, or up and down, up and down. We can't do that with a single electron because it's faster than we can think, it's faster than we can speak. We can't do it. One electron in one atom, right? In one grouping of atoms, right? We barely catch up with that. And what about the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of electrons that move in and out of our body that happen on? We can't keep up with those either. Right? So it's, no matter what we think, it's wrong. What does wrong mean? What does right mean? Well, it's how close it brings us to a sense of beauty, truth, and goodness. It's how much it takes us in that direction. Now, if we can't keep up with a single thing, what chance is there that we're right? And of course, nothing. There's no chance. There's a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a chance that we're right. So what do we have then, right? If we can't be right, if the whole premise of pursuing right, what's the whole premise of pursuing right? Well, we take half of reality, right? Anytime there's a duality, we've cut the one into two, right? That's basic geometry. So if we create a duality and we decide that this is wrong, then we're also creating the illusion that on the other side of the polarity, we're creating the illusion that it's right. So we're creating a polarity illusion. It's not real. I mean, we've just taken the one, we've divided it into two. Now we've got right and we've got wrong. Now, anytime you do that, you've got two equal halves. So by creating the illusion of the word right and wrong, we are entering a duality. So now half of the universe is wrong and half of it is right. Now we say then that the right side is the good one, and that should persist. Right? The right side is the good one; it should persist. Okay. Well, what's the opposite of that? Well, the left one then is the wrong one, and it shouldn't exist. There's just one problem, right? Just because you decide with a little pea brain capable or not actually capable of tracking a single electron for a single second, right? You could spend your entire life trying to catch up to an electron movement in a single second of, so one electron of one atom of one molecule for a single second. Went here and then, 10 billion milliseconds later it went here and then it went there, right? And you wouldn't see clearly because it's not in isolation, right? The electron can't exist without the time and space that holds it. So how is it different from time and space if it can't exist without it, right? So all these things fall apart. But, let's just say for a moment we buy into one of our somewhat simplistic paradigms that half of this is good and half of it's bad and blah, blah, blah. And so we have to pursue this bit and banishing the other bit or denying it, right? Well, imagine you take the Earth, another sphere, and you cut it in half. You have a big laser, right? You have a huge laser, you all get together, right? Because this is the bad side of the Earth and this is the good one, right? So you cut the Earth in half. Well, is it still the earth if it's cut in half, right? Can you have the good part without the bad part? Well, what happens with, like, let's just say we cut the earth nicely here. What happens with the river that's flowing right to this edge, right? It spins out here, right? Or it falls into the molten core. What happens to the molten core, right? It starts spilling out. What happens when molten core rains down over here? What happens with the wobble? That's, circles have a nice graceful thing. If you've ever tried to drive a car at 16,000 miles an hour, right? That's a 180-degree tire. Well, it's not a very pleasant ride. Now, if it's so unpleasant that everyone dies, is it still the earth? If all the streams and oceans pour off the edge and there's no more stream, is that still the earth? Well, it's certainly not the earth that was before, right? So anytime you divide something, you change it. And when you understand that the whole is interconnected, you have an interconnected whole, the divisions are all illusions in the mind. That's good behavior, that's bad behavior, right? And we believe that, right? We believe, right? We enter the illusion, we leave reality, we be as we leave that reality through the illusion of language. So, it's a shaky proposition, attempting to be right, right? So if we're not willing to be wrong in our pursuit of what's right, good luck with that, right? Because there isn't a single thing that we can come up with in our mind that, relative to the grace and complexity of ecological truth, isn't wrong by the very fact that we're thinking it, right? In other words, as soon as we descend from the grace of the one into the illusion of duality, we're wrong. What is wrong? Well, you could say it's chronic and unnecessary suffering. Why? Well, because we don't like it, right? We're all motivated, we all desire to feel sustainably better. And we want to avoid feeling chronically worse. So we say what's wrong is something that creates unnecessary chronic suffering. That's what's wrong. Right? The problem with your car is you have a flat tire. Why is it a problem? Well, it's a problem because you will suffer because of that flat tire. Your car will drive around, maybe you'll get in an accident because of that flat tire. Then you'll suffer even more. Right now, you'll just suffer bumps. But if you don't fix it, you'll get in an accident, and that's really wrong. Why? Because you don't want to suffer, and your suffering will increase. And so what's wrong is the perception of unnecessary suffering. That's wrong. You don't do that to a child. Why? It's unnecessary. It's uneducated. The child will suffer. You will suffer if you do that to a child. So it's wrong. What's right? Well, the best practice. What's the best practice? Grace. Working towards grace is the best practice, right? The least amount of unnecessary waste and suffering. The most amount of sustainable well-being with as little hassle as possible. That's grace. We want grace. Why? Because it feels good, right? So, grace is good. The fall from grace into the knowledge of good and evil, into the illusion of language, into chronic and unnecessary suffering, that's wrong. That's hell, right? Heaven is the ecological whole. Hell is That's good, that's bad, this thing, that's the enemy, that's this is this here, that I can't. That's hell, right? Because we've cut the world into bits. So everything that I've said so far is wrong. Why? Well, I've used words that have a grid like this, right? But of course, reality is far more complex than that, which means that there's all these in-between words that I didn't use because I don't have, quote unquote, an infinite amount of time to go into it. Right? I've already spent more time being wrong in this way than many people want to listen to, right? Because it's wrong to spend this amount of time discussing abstract ideas when you could be out smelling the roses. So everything that I've said is wrong. So what's the best that you can do? Well, you can be willing to be wrong in pursuit of what's right. Meaning you can be willing to be in illusion, out to lunch, missing the points, barely grasping a tiny fraction of what's going on, in pursuit of grace, in pursuit of something better. If we're not willing to be wrong, we're not willing to be human. We're not willing to exist within the consciousness of language because we're always wrong within the consciousness of language. It's impossible to be right. Now, to be wrong in search of the right is to use the jumbled mess of skewed paradigms in language to reconstruct the whole, right? To move back in the direction of grace, right? And to do that, we have to explore these edges, right? Because the circle is perfect, it is an infinite number of distinctions, but we only have, a few thousand words, a few thousand days, a few thousand weeks or months, So the best that we can do is we can move in the direction of the one, the direction of the sphere, the direction of grace, within the very limited paradigm of our language and ideas. And as we do, things will smooth out a bit, which, of course, we'll say is a good thing, but that's also wrong, right? Because every time reality challenges our little box, right, we have to reconstruct it again. We reconstruct it in a different way. We never reconstruct our little box of relating and understanding the one in quite the same way. And no person sees it in quite the same way, right? We all see things in a different way. And when our identity is primarily mental, i.e. verbal, these little boxes and delineations are critical, right? Because if we meet someone with a slightly different identity, right, they agree with us just a week after we do, right? We should declare peace. No, we shouldn't. Well, a week later, right, then they say we should declare peace. But then we've changed, like we're out of phase, right? So when we meet someone with a different architecture of wrongness in pursuit of what's right, and they identify, that's me, those are my thoughts, well, it's terribly threatening. Because who am I, right? Who am I without the identification to these structures, these illusions. These are mine. I've got to do them, right? And if I don't do these, everything will go wrong. I'll lose myself. So, and then of course no one is going to come up with an identical illusion of how the world isn't. And so the way to move towards wholeness or integration, or to be able to be with someone who's different, is of course to transcend language, which is to transcend thought, right? Then you get into sensation. This sensation feels right, but it's wrong. You're married, but it feels right. But you're married, and it's wrong for married people to touch other married people in that way. Which way? Right? We can rub ears in this culture. That's fine in this culture. But this is wrong in that culture. No, we can kiss on the cheeks, but ear rubbing, watch out. That's wrong, right? But it feels right, but it's wrong. So look at the dictionary, right? Look at this bit of words and this bit of words that doesn't fit. So you can begin to transcend the illusion of separations with other dimensions, right? It's harder to say on the dimension of touch alone. Like if touch becomes primary and you want to feel good, well then you say, well, that's right, that's good. That's right, that's good because it feels right, it feels good. i.e., those bodies are attuned. You can also do, of course, the opposite. The right thing to do here is this, because of this, because of this. But I feel so sad. I want to caress that face, but it's wrong, right? So which is primary? That feels so right. The structure of language, right? Which is the primary drive? Now, which is the right drive? We know what is, like in Western culture, the primary drive tends to be language. Right? You go to a place like Thailand, and it's not the primary drive. The primary drive is more one of presence. Relax, smile. You talk too much. Relax. Ah, that's right. Aha! That's right. That's right. You're smiling. That's the important thing. Don't distract from the smile. Don't distract from the moment. Now, is that right? Right. Well, if you're in your mind, you've got to figure that out. If you're in your body, you know it is. It's right. It feels good. Right? So Lazaris is in Western culture, so 99% of what Lazaris does is monologue, words, very little massage, very little touch, very little let's smile to your neighbor, let's dance, right? Lazaris is in the paradigm where words, right? A country of law is a country dictated by linguistic structures. This is called this, and this goes like this, and it doesn't matter if it feels good, it doesn't matter if it feels bad. It doesn't matter if it's absurd, it is the right thing of do. We are a nation of law. But what law? Well, these laws here, these words. That's the right thing to do. That's the outlaw, the one outside, right? But of course, there are other cultures that are not cultures of those laws. Their laws are not words. The laws are courtesy, right? You don't make a fuss. You enjoy the social ambience. That's the law. You point out the unfairness, you've ruined the ambience. You say, why did he get the bigger piece of cake and I didn't, right? You've just broken the law. One was the law of fairness, but now you've broken the law of ambience. If you come here, you have to support the ambience or you're not welcome here. Because the law is ambience. It's about the vibe. No, that's not helping the vibe. No, we don't want to hear your philosophical ideas. No, we don't want to have to listen to your questions. No, chill. That's the law. The law is let go of the laws, be present, right? Well, is that the right thing? Well, it is if you want to chill with other people that want to chill in a paradigm in which it takes just a few people to destroy the vibe and a cooperative flow to allow the vibe. Well, that's the right thing in that lens, in that experience. So if we are not willing to pursue what's right while being wrong all of the time to varying degrees, really, there's no justification for existence, right? And low self-esteem, I don't feel fit to exist, right? Well, what doesn't feel fit to exist? The ego. And what is the ego? It is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that it identifies with, that it holds on to. If it feels unworthy of existence, it's saying, my pattern is not worthy. My pattern of thoughts are not worthy. My patterns of feelings are not worthy. Now, if we understand through this conversation that we are always wrong, it's just a matter of degree, right? That the very paradigm of right and wrong is one of those degrees of wrongness, right? We are wrong, we will be wrong, we have been wrong. Just the idea of talking about this is wrong, right? It's wrong. There are ways to dance these truths that are more right than sitting here talking about it. I've got a sore neck here. It's wrong that I'm attending to an idea rather than attending to a sore neck. It's wrong. Why? Because it doesn't bring about as much well-being. But I don't know that I'm wrong, right? Because I've been brainwashed through the behavior of 10,000 cult members to think that this idea is more important than the sensation of this neck, which is why I'm sitting here rather than getting a massage. It's wrong, right? Well-being goes up when there are more massages. So, right, we're looking through a lens. Now, you're wrong too. There are so many more dimensional ways to engage rather than watching a relative stranger, symbolic bits on a screen, remote, talking about words that are at best crude representation of some tiny bit of reality. That's so wrong relative to dancing, relative to presence, relative to getting together and laughing. It's so wrong. And yet, it is a path through the illusion, through the mistakes of this cult, of this culture, to at least lift the language in the direction of beauty, truth, and goodness. And perhaps at a later date, I'll talk about all the things that were wrong in the pursuit of my relationship with Lazaris, meaning my pursuit of whether it's the relationship with myself, with my dog, with Lazaris. There's a pursuit of beauty, truth, and goodness. And it's wrong all the time, right? It's off. It's not the full realization. It's the mistaken idea, and it doesn't end up in grace. So what do you do with that? Well, those things are also wrong. So if we're not willing to be wrong all of the time in pursuit of a version of beauty, truth, and goodness that's also wrong, but it's more right than it is wrong. To pursue beauty, truth, and goodness is more right than not pursuing beauty, truth, and goodness. But to understand the beauty, truth, and goodness in what is more right than to pursue elevated, illusionary bits of beauty, truth, and goodness, in contrast, through a polarizing delusion, to other bits that we say are ugly, right? So it's more true to pursue the beauty, truth, and goodness in what is than it is to divide the one into two, right? But not necessarily, right? For the child that's been abused, it's more right to say, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. And this is right. The child becomes the adolescent. That's more right, more beautiful, true, and good than saying, I'm worthless. I was abused and I'm worthless. It's all my fault. I guess I deserved it. Right? But it's more right at some point in the becoming of an adult to understand how from the moment of the Big Bang in the vastness of the possibility field, each thing that is connected to every other thing. Right? It's more right to move towards forgiving, which is to let go of that form of being right, of that form of pursuing beauty, truth, and goodness, to pursue another form of empathy or of understanding. This is how generational patterns work. That's just the way they are. I can hate them, I can love them, I can understand them, I can empathize with them. And this is how they work. Right? This energy skips a generation and moves into this energy. Oh. It's not personal, right? This person playing out this role is not bad. They're playing out a role. What's the purpose of the role? How does that role lead to this and this? Well, these people acting out alert the cult that something's off. And these cult members try to bury it, but then these other cult members try to pay attention to it. And eventually the pattern gets resolved. That's how it works. What's going on? Well, evolution continues. 1 billion years after 1 billion years. Complexity, variation, possibility fields are explored.